This is not a rant about hockey, and it's not a rant about the great Sidney Crosby. Michael McLean, brassballsvideos.com. I am an ex-professional hockey coach turned 8-figure entrepreneur. I shoot these broken iPhone walking and talking videos every day in your email box at 6 a.m. I don't miss. I don't take days off. I don't take weekends off. I shoot a broken iPhone video every day of the year. And if you're on my list at brassballsvideos.com, I will send you one every single day to your righteous email box at 5:59. So this is not a rant about hockey. You don't have to be a hockey fan, but I wanted to weigh in on one of the most impressive accomplishments I've ever seen in 31 years as a former player, as a former hockey coach, and as a former team owner. I actually own my own 2 hockey junior franchises. Earlier this week, the great Sidney Crosby, Pittsburgh Penguins Sidney Crosby, tied Wayne Gretzky's record. There's only 2 men that have done it, Gretzky and now Crosby, has tied the record for 19, count them, 19 consecutive seasons, averaging 1 point or more per game. Now, think about that for a second. He's done it for 19 years. Crosby's done it for 19 years, where he has averaged at least 1 point per game for 19 years, almost 2 decades. There's not a lot of Gretzky records that can be broken, and Crosby has tied this one. A point per game for 19 glorious years. That's what he's averaged. Think about the level of massive consistency. Think about the level of massive compounding, of doing it right every single day. Do you know I have a Sidney Crosby rule that my 11-year-old daughter knows off by heart? Do you know I have a Sidney Crosby rule that anybody that's ever played junior hockey for me, any of my youth hockey programs, even my skating, my power skating programs with my school back home in Canada, they all eat, sleep, and breathe my Sidney Crosby rule. And I taught this to my 11-year-old daughter, Emery, about 4 years ago when she started playing organized youth hockey. She was taking weekly power skating, and I was coaching these programs. And the Sidney Crosby rule is simple. First on, last off. First on, last off. And what I was referring to is one of the stories from Crosby's coach. Crosby's won 3 major championship rings, 2 Stanley Cups, an Olympic gold, a World Junior gold. His fingers, since he was 12 years old, are full of championship rings. Winners aren't losers. So Crosby's coach at the time was talking about in the playoffs when they were chasing another Stanley Cup championship, which of course they did win. And they talked about how he literally had to kick Sid the Kid off the ice on off days. So compare this to regular pro athletes, whether in the NFL, whether in the NBA, whether in Major League Baseball. Compare Crosby, his mindset and his work ethic, to almost everybody else in pro sport. His coach was referring to the fact that he played the night before 30 minutes, 25 minutes, half the game. That's not easy to do in pro hockey. Chasing a Stanley Cup is one of the most brutal things that an athlete can do. There's a reason they call the Stanley Cup the hardest professional championship to win. It's not even up for debate. It's not up for debate. The Stanley Cup champions, as my friend and former client and past Boston Bruins Stanley Cup winning coach Claude Julien used to say, Michael, the year I won with the Bruins, he said it took us 111 games in total, from exhibition, from the training camp, regular season, 111 games we played to lift Lord Stanley's Cup. 111 games of pounding, of grinding, of fighting, of hitting, working to win a Stanley Cup. So when a guy plays 25 minutes a night like Crosby, it's a really big deal. Most athletes, most ordinary athletes, would take the day off, right? It's an optional skate. You play, the next day off, optional skate, then play again. Most of the top players, they're not going to even put their skates on. But Pittsburgh's head coach at the time said, we literally have to convince Crosby to get off the ice. He's first on, last off. First on, last off. What do you think that does for your team culture, your team standards, your franchise, for your players, for your staff, for your fan base, for your corporate people in the office, when they see the greatest player, okay, next to Mario Lemieux, who owns the team, first on, last off every day. Every practice, first on, last off. I hear it's the same in the weight room. First in, last out. First in, last out. I hear it's the same with any off-ice training the team does. First in, last out. And I know with Crosby's summer training, because I know what he does in the summer when he returns to Canada, to Halifax, I've seen the gym in his lakefront mansion. I've seen how he operates with his youth hockey team. I know what his summer looks like training after a long NHL season. The guy is first on, last off. First on, last off. So that's my rule, my Sidney Crosby rule for my daughter. For any player that is going to be a captain for me, is going to be an assistant captain. You know what? When it comes to practice, when it comes to the weight room, when it comes to the video room, when it comes to whatever it is, preparation, first on, last off. And that, my friend, is Sidney Crosby. Nobody talks about that stuff. They talk about his Herculean talent, which is, of course, part of the equation. But what makes a guy like Crosby able to tie Gretzky's consistency record is the fact for the last 19 years, the guy has been first on, last off. It's the private victories that make a point per game average over 19 years. That's that massive consistency. I talk with you every day about stacking the W's, about stacking the tiny little victories. Getting up and drinking a couple of glasses of water. That's a win. Getting up and bending down and praying for 3 or 4 minutes, gratitude, giving gratitude to your creator, your God, personal unit, whatever you want. That's stacking the wins. Putting on your shoes and going outside without your iPhone and walking outside in nature, in the snow, the wind, the bugs, the heat, for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, stacking the wins, tiny little wins. I talk about reading 1 page of a book every day, stacking the wins. I talk about sitting down and copywriting for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, stacking the wins. Weekly date nights with your queen, where you organize the walk, or maybe you play some tennis, or maybe you go golfing together, or maybe you go and share a slice of pizza. It's all about the time. It's not about what you do. Stacking the wins. And these tiny little wins, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, are exactly what Sidney Crosby has done over the last 19 years. It's exactly what Wayne Gretzky did. A point per game average for 19 straight years and counting. This is how a guy, Crosby, who should be in the twilight of his career, he should be wrapping it up as a player. He should be handing off the title as, the most valuable player for the last 2 decades in hockey. He should be handing that off to Connor McDavid. But he refuses to hand it off, and of course Connor McDavid is the most valuable player in the game today. He's the best player in the game today. But Crosby is in the twilight of his career. He's no longer Sid the Kid. This guy is playing some of the most valuable and complete hockey of his lifetime. And that's saying a lot. This is a guy who has evolved as a player, as a person, as a leader. And he's as valuable to the Pittsburgh Penguins now, with a struggling hockey club, than he's ever been. Even those Stanley Cup winning years. Crosby, will go down in history, in my opinion, my biased opinion, as one of the top 5 players in the game, period. He'll be there with Wayne Gretzky and Bobby Orr and Gordie Howe, and I think he fits in there in the 4th or 5th spot. But the amazing thing is, this guy is so dedicated to his fitness, to his nutrition, to his mental health. He's so dedicated to being first on and last off, that he's literally extending his career by 5, maybe 10 seasons. And he loves the game. He's not playing for the money anymore. He's made more money than any man could ever want. But he's at the top. He's near the top of his game at this age. So it's too bad that the Pittsburgh Penguins are a mess. It's too bad that they haven't found a way to surround him with better support players, because this will be the 2nd year in a row that Pittsburgh doesn't even make the playoffs. They may sneak in, they may not sneak in, but at the end of the day, Crosby needs to be part of a program where you're pushing every year for a Stanley Cup. So that's just not reality anymore. But there's a guy who has evolved as a player. He has worked on his skill set every year for the last 25 years. He's worked on his fitness, his conditioning, his mental toughness. He started wearing the captain's C. This is a guy who's a student, a serious student for life. First on, last off. What more can you have as your team leader in the locker room, in the weight room, in the video room, on ice, in the locker room before games? What more could you ask for? First on, last off. Do you think that when you put in that type of effort as a husband or a father or a small business owner, do you think your words carry more weight when everybody knows that you're putting in the time? And he's extended his career by putting in the time physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And the thing I'm most impressed, and I've always talked about Crosby, because I'm not a fan of most pro athletes. I don't put any of these fucking guys on pedestals, okay? I look at Michael Jordan as the greatest basketball in history. I look at, Wayne Gretzky as the greatest hockey player in history. I look at, I can just go down. I look at, Tom Brady as the greatest quarterback in history. Of course, he's going to be pushed by Mahomes over the next few years. But what I'm most impressed about is the kind of guy, the kind of man that Crosby is. Which brings me to a couple of stories that you've never heard and you'll never hear about Sid the Kid. And it goes back to what we talk about, what we rant about here every day. I don't give a shit how much money you have. I don't care how much money I have. I don't care how much Sidney Crosby has. I don't care what Tom Brady has. I don't care how much money Patrick Mahomes has. I don't care about any of that. If I'm going to root for a guy, if I'm going to watch a guy, if I'm going to support a guy or a gal, especially if they're pro athletes, I want to know what kind of a person are they first. What kind of a person are they? So when you've played in the NHL for 25 years like Sidney Crosby, and not one single time since you've been age 18 in the spotlight, every restaurant, every bar, everywhere you go, you're under the spotlight in Pittsburgh or in Canada. Not one single time have you brought embarrassment or disgrace to your franchise or your family. Like, the guy is squeaky clean because of the person he is. He doesn't have to hide out. He doesn't have to, hire a PR firm to fix his reputation. He doesn't have to have private this, private that. The guy lives by his values, his principles, and his morals. And where do you think values and principles and morals come? They come from us as parents. Your mom, your dad, your grandmother, that's more is caught than taught, right? More is caught than taught. So Crosby, one of the stories I heard, which I love the most, was when Crosby, he was in his first year in Pittsburgh. He's 18 years old. He's the star phenom of the Pittsburgh Penguins. He's just starting his career in Pittsburgh. His parents insisted, moving from Canada to a city of Pittsburgh, they insisted that their new celebrity son, their multi-million-dollar son, live with Mario Lemieux, who was the Pittsburgh Penguins' greatest player in history, but also still playing on the team. Mario was still playing. They insisted that their son live with the Lemieux, that they live with Mario, his wife, and their children. They absolutely insisted there wasn't going to be any condominiums, there wasn't going to be any apartments, there wasn't going to be any of that stuff. It wasn't going to be the celebrity scene in Pittsburgh. It wasn't going to be any of this stuff. Living with teammates that are the same. None of that. Troy Crosby and his wife, Sidney's dad, said, we're going to set this up. Your first couple years in Pittsburgh, you're 18, you're 19, you're going to be 20. Okay, there's going to be enough distractions. There's going to be enough celebrity. There's going to be enough of all this rat poison. We want you living with Mr. and Mrs. Lemieux and their kids. And that's what happened for the first 2 years of Sidney's life. You tell me that isn't strong parenting, that isn't strong leadership, and you don't think that had an effect on him tying the Gretzky's record? Instead of being a Ryan Leaf or a Johnny Manziel or somebody who doesn't win even a single game, hasn't accomplished anything as a player or as a leader, they cash their first check and they're done without accomplishing anything. In other words, they were last on, first off. Trust me, when Johnny Manziel was in college and in the NFL and then in the CFL, that's your quarterback who's last in the room, first out. Last in practice, first off the field. Same with the Jeff Georges of the world and any of these guys that have super talent. You can't question their talent. You question their work ethic and their character and their integrity. So in Crosby's case, that's my favorite story, is the guy, it just comes from mom and dad. You're going to spend the first 2 years in Pittsburgh, living in a home with home-cooked meals, and you're going to be around the greatest hockey player in Pittsburgh Penguins history. Can you imagine being mentored by Tom Brady, being mentored by Mario Lemieux, being mentored by Joe Montana? That's exactly what Crosby received living in the home of the Lemieux. That's parenting, that's mentorship, that's all he had to do the first 2 years in Pittsburgh until the team improved, until he got his feet under him. All he had to do was work on hockey, focusing on the one thing that got him there. He didn't have to worry about nutrition. He didn't have to worry about parties. He didn't have to worry about endorsements. He didn't have to worry about any of that stuff. Live with us, focus on getting better as a player. And he focused, of course, on first on, last off. So that's one of my favorite stories about his parents. By the way, Troy Crosby, his dad, works for the city of Halifax. And I believe his mom is a retired school teacher. So upper middle class people, right? Upper middle class people, professionals, not super wealthy, none of that stuff. They live in the small town city of Cole Harbour outside Halifax in Canada. Small town values, small town family values, work ethic, integrity, honesty. So that's my first story of the great Sidney Crosby. Secondly, it was in that same first year, he was 18 or 19 years old. And Pittsburgh had a 3 or 4 day break at Christmas. So Crosby's in his first year playing in the NHL, and they get their only break of the season at Christmas. And Sidney flies home to Cole Harbour, and he's got a couple of days before he has to go back to Pittsburgh. So a short but sweet little break. And he's sitting in the basement at home with his dad and his sister, who is a hell of an athlete as well. And they're sitting there and they're watching, I think, the World Junior Hockey, whatever, something on the TV. And Troy, the dad, says to Crosby's sister, I need you to go upstairs and finish those dishes. I need you to go upstairs and finish those dishes that were left in the sink. So, Sidney's the new millionaire of the NHL, the most recognized rookie. And his sister jumps up from the chair and she heads upstairs to finish the dishes. She's his younger sister. And Sidney gives a chuckle. He gives a little bit of a chuckle. In other words, get up there and finish those dishes, will you, sis? And Troy Crosby wasn't going to have any of that. He didn't give a shit whether he was in the NHL or he was in the NBA or he was in grade 10 high school. He didn't care. And he looked over at his son sitting there beside him, and he said, that driveway isn't going to shovel itself. That driveway isn't going to shovel itself. If you know anything about East Coast Canadian winters, it snows almost every third day, and it snows by the foot. So here's the NHL super kid, the wonder kid, the new multi-million-dollar superstar. But that shit doesn't fly in the Crosby residence. And Sidney learned out instantly, get your ass upstairs and shovel that driveway, superstar. But it gets even better with my third story. Apparently, earlier that summer, when Sidney went number 1 in the draft, of course, number 1 overall. And he's pretty excited. He's going to get the bucks, he's going to get the endorsements, he's going to get all of it that he deserves. And his mom, who's a school teacher, his dad works for the city, blue collar, white collar, whatever you want to call them. And he says to his mom and dad, before he heads off to Pittsburgh, he says, I'm going to buy you guys a new home. It's always been a dream of mine to buy you guys a house. And now that I'm in the NHL, now that I've signed this big contract, now that I'm on my way to stardom, I'm going to buy you and Mom a new house. You can't be living in this old house. I'm going to buy you a new house. And his dad and his mom look at each other. And then his dad looks back at Sidney and says, fuck you. We'll buy our own house. And to this day, they still live in the same house, as far as I know, in Cole Harbor. Sidney has a beautiful lake house with a gym and the whole 9 yards. His private life has remained incredibly private. He's not married. He doesn't have children. He hasn't had any problems off the ice. Just a solid person. But do you see where parenting, do you see where leadership comes into it? Where young people in our lives, whether it's our kids, whether it's our students, whether it's our grandkids, even family members, where young people can lose their way, even in great families, and you have those pillars, those mums and dads who are like, thank you, no, we'll buy our own house. Or that driveway won't shovel itself, pal. Or you'll actually live with the Lemieux these first couple years, and we'll discuss you buying your own home or condo in a couple of years. You focus on hockey. Is it any wonder he put himself into a position to tie Wayne Gretzky's 19-year point per game average record? Massive consistency. What's the message from his mom? What's the message from his dad? What's the message from Mario Lemieux? What's the message from all his coaches? It's the same message we talk about here every day. Massive consistency. To hell with massive action. If you can do 13 things one day, but then you can't do any of them for 3, 4, 5, 6 days, or you take the weekends off, or you lose your way, then what good is that? There's no compounding effect. If you live clean and you do the things you're supposed to do Monday to Thursday or Monday to Friday, but then you burn it to the ground every weekend, you pour gasoline on the plant that's your life, you nourish it, you read, you write, you give it water, you give it sunlight, and then on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, you give that plant, which is your world, your life, your body, your mind, you pour gasoline on it every weekend. Like Cardone says, weekends will make you weak. So I'm not strong enough. I'm not strong enough to be a massive action guy. I shoot 365 videos a day, a week, a month, because I'm not strong enough to do it stop and start. 3 this day, 2 days. I can't do it. I need to use I do the Mount Everest where every day do I get to the summit. Better 5 minutes than a day off. Better 10 minutes than a day off. Better 20 minutes than a day off. Because that's the only way compounding can happen. Massive consistency equals compounding. If I can't put those W's, if I can't stack the W's, the eighth wonder of the world, Buffett calls the eighth wonder of the world compounding. He's referring to your money. Well, compounding can't happen if you put your money in the bank, you keep it there for 3 days, and then you take it out for 2. Or you put your money in the bank for 30 days, then you take it out for 10. It can't happen. So you're not using the eighth wonder of the world, as he says. Massive consistency, first on, last off. First on, last off. When I get up every morning at 5 to 6, whatever it is, that's my first win because the house is in darkness. And I'm like, first up means first place. And that only means something to me, but you see a winner's, a champion's mindset. First up means first place. For Sidney Crosby, first on the ice at practice means first place. First in the weight room means first place. And then the other side of that, is Crosby is like last off, last out of the weight room, last out of the locker room, last guy talking to the media, last guy off the practice sheet. You know how he looks at that? That's another victory, another first place, another first place. And he stacked these W's for the last 30 years. And now it's all coming together where the compounding is happening, where this and other records are going to fall. Massive consistency, massive compounding equals that tipping point. Nothing's happening, nothing's happening, nothing's happening. Boom! Scale to the moon. Your fitness, your marriage, your relationship with your kids, your bank account, everything. It doesn't look like it's working, doesn't look like it's working. Massive consistency, stacking the W's, believing in the process, compounding, frustration, anger, boom. Just like that. That's what's called the tipping point. The tipping point. That's why it takes most businesses 10 years to make any money. Just stacking the W's, nobody believes. We're not seeing anything quick, rich. Boom! Tipping point. First on, last off. That's what I teach my daughter. And it was interesting. She would always be the first at the rink. She would always be the first waiting to get on the ice with the Zamboni. And then she lets everybody else off the ice surface, whether she's with her school chums or whether she's in hockey. Here she is, younger than most of the kids, and she's at the very last letting all these other players off. And I tell her that's how Crosby does it. That's how Crosby does it. First on, last off. First on, last off. Have you ever noticed that every great man or woman, every great legend, everybody who's any business owner that's built an empire or built a badass world, the people's names you know. Did you ever notice how in sports, Michael Jordan was a gym rat? Okay? Sidney Crosby is a rink rat. They're savants. That's a term for somebody who has obsession and passion with it. They're rink rats, they're gym rats, they're ballpark rats. They can't get enough of it. They need to be around it. Okay, a guy like Steve Jobs. He's obsessed with it. He was obsessed with it. Henry Ford was obsessed with it. Winston Churchill was obsessed with it. Ronald Reagan was obsessed with it. Any athlete, any husband, any father, any entrepreneur that changes the world, they're absolutely a savant when it comes to it. They eat, sleep, and breathe it. When you talk to them, you can feel it coming out of their pores. They cannot not talk about it. Sidney Crosby cannot not be a part of it. When he's done his career, he's going to have to go on TV like Bill Belichick or Saban or something, because they're no longer a part of it, but they got to be a part of it. It's in their bloodstream. It's in their DNA. They're men on mission. They cannot not talk about it. They cannot not be around it. And that's what the greats are all like. They eat, sleep, and breathe it. And they commit to massive consistency, massive compounding, and the results speak for themselves. That's the message I have here almost every day. Forget about the home runs. Forget about these triples you talk about. Forget about the hacks and the shortcuts and the magic beans and the magic pills, and use the Sidney Crosby rule in your life for the things that are important. There's 2 or 3 things. Be first on, last off. Outwork your competition, outthink your competition, outdiscipline your competition. First on, last off. First on, last off. And see what that does for your life over the next 30 days, 365 days. Be the guy where your mission is simple. I never miss. whether it's a video, whether it's an email, whether it's walking, whether it's drinking water, whether it's eating the right foods, whether it's not drinking alcohol, whether it's telling your kids you love them, your queen, never miss. I'm the guy who never misses. I'm not the most talented. I'm not the most gifted. I'm none of that stuff. I'm just the guy, relentless, that never misses. And I'm committed to the process. I believe in compounding. I believe in never missing. I believe in the power of massive consistency. And I believe there's a tipping point to being relentless. And that's why I wear it around my neck, on my t-shirts, on my arm. I wake up, I don't want to do something. I remind myself, Michael, be relentless. Do it for 5 minutes. Put on the rucking vest, drink the water, get started. Get walking, get drinking the water, sit down and read a page. And then I get momentum in my corner. Be relentless. First on, last off. First on, last off. Listen, I got something absolutely off the hook for you. If you decide to join my email list at brassballsvideo.com, I'm going to send you one of my $30,000 Masterclass trainings. And this has never seen the light of day. And it's absolutely free if you join my email list. If you're on my email list already, you're going to get a copy of this training. And this is a training I did last year with my $30,000 champions. They're the only 4 men on earth that have ever seen this training. And it's actually something right out of left field. But they said it was the most valuable training we did all year in our $30,000 mastermind. What do you think it was about? Do you think it was about marketing? Do you think it was about being a better dad? Do you think it was about weight loss? Or none of it? Copywriting, none of it. It was my system for teaching my 11-year-old how to become a kick-ass public speaker. How to take all that fear we have. Public speaking is the #1 fear in the world. For men like us, #1 fear. Public speaking is shooting videos. Public speaking is speaking to people in a coffee shop. Public speaking is writing. Public speaking is giving a toast at your brother's wedding. Public speaking is, speaking to people at a restaurant. It's everywhere. And if you can find and use these secrets that I cover in this 50-minute training, I'm telling you right now, it'll make you a better speaker. It'll make your queen a better speaker. And it'll make your children, it'll give them an unfair advantage. I use this when my daughter was in the theater production last year at home, Matilda. She was having a few butterflies and a few other things, and she's got lots of experience public speaking. But these are the secrets that I shared with her that time, and she ended up with one of the key roles. She ended up, kicking ass in front of hundreds and hundreds of people night after night in that production. And I put it together as a special training for my champions last year. It's never seen the light of day. Only 4 guys have ever seen this. When you go to brassballsvideos.com and opt in, I'm not going to spam or anything. I'm just adding you to my email list. I will send you a copy of this later this week. And if you're already on my email list, this is a special bonus I'm going to send you this week for free. It's nothing to buy. It's just if you opt in to my email list, you get this special training, public speaking training that I've only shared with my best of my best championship mastermind members. That's a hell of a deal for putting in your email address at brassballsvideos.com. That's it for today. Remember, massive consistency equals massive compounding. Stacking up those wins every day like Sidney Crosby, being on first on, last off, and having people in your life like they did for Sid the Kid say, man, we got to kick that cat out of the weight room. We got to kick that cat off the ice. They love it. They can't get enough of it. That's the only way to live your life, with passion and obsession for whatever it is you choose to do. You're first in, last out. 2 words that change my life, 2 words that'll change yours. Be relentless.